Zira felt the sting of pain before she fully regained consciousness. Her body ached in ways that were unfamiliar, her limbs heavy and weak. She blinked her eyes open, but the world around her spun. Her vision blurred, and she immediately tried to lift her hand to her face, only to find her arms restrained. Panic surged through her chest, making her heart race as she struggled against the unfamiliar bonds. Her body had been battered by the violence of the battle. She had been caught in an ambush, and though she had fought fiercely, her enemies were far stronger, and she had been left behind in the wake of their retreat. She remembered the rush of blood, the sharp, searing pain when she had been struck. It felt like hours ago, but she knew it could not have been that long. Slowly, she began to calm herself. Her breath steadied, and she tried to focus on her surroundings. This was not the battlefield. It was quiet here, far too quiet. Her sharp senses began to take in her surroundings, the soft hum of machinery, the faint smell of antiseptic, and the soft rustle of fabric nearby. It was not the sound of soldiers or her fellow warriors. It was the sound of humans. Zira's heart skipped a beat. The humans, the race she had heard so much about, but had never encountered before. The stories told by her people painted them as unpredictable, violent, and dangerous. Her people had fought wars with others for generations, but humans were an unknown quantity. Still, her instincts told her to be cautious. Her pride and her upbringing told her never to show weakness. She pulled against the restraints again, but this time the effort felt useless. There was no escaping. Instead, she looked down at her own body. Her injuries were severe. The pain in her chest and side was a reminder of the brutal blow she had received. She could feel bandages wrapped around her body, securing her in place. Whoever had taken her in was at least practical enough to care for her wounds. Then a voice interrupted her thoughts, soft and calm, with an edge of concern. "Don't try to move," it said. Zira froze. She had not heard the human approach. Her eyes snapped to the source of the voice. A man stood beside her. His features were unfamiliar, but he looked human. Pale skin, dark hair, and eyes that were warm, but filled with worry. His expression softened as he noticed the tension in her eyes. "I've been trying to make you comfortable," he continued, "but you were in bad shape. You were barely conscious when I found you." Zira's mind raced, but she did not respond. She wasn't sure how to react. She had expected hostility, not kindness. Was this man an ally, or was this some sort of trick? Could she trust him? Was he one of the humans who had been involved in the war she had fought in? She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. A rough cough escaped her lips, making her wince. The man moved quickly to her side, offering her a small cup of water. "Here," he said gently. "Just a sip for now. You've been through a lot." Zira hesitated, her instincts telling her to fight and run, but her body refused to comply. The pain in her chest was too much, and she was too weak to defend herself. With a resigned sigh, she accepted the water. The cool liquid soothed her dry throat, and she felt a small sense of relief. When she finished, she looked up at the man again. He was still watching her, his eyes filled with something she hadn't expected: empathy. His gaze was not one of fear or judgment, but understanding. "You're safe," he said, his voice quiet but steady. For now, at least. Zira didn't know what to make of this. How could a human, someone who was supposedly her enemy, speak with such compassion? Was this some kind of trick? Or was it possible that not all humans were as the stories described? I should go," Zira croaked, trying to sit up, but she felt a wave of dizziness. The world tilted again. "I have to lie back down," he interrupted, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder to keep her from rising. "You need rest. You're not in a state to go anywhere." She flinched at the touch. but it was not harsh. He wasn't trying to hurt her, just holding her still. Zira struggled to keep her anger in check. Every instinct told her to resist, to fight against whatever this human was trying to do. But she couldn't. She was too injured, too weak to fight. Her pride stung, but she swallowed it down. "I'm not one of your enemies," the man said. He must have noticed the wariness in her eyes. "My name's Caleb Blackwell. I'm a doctor. I found you while I was out on a patrol." A doctor? Zira's brow furrowed at the word. She had heard of humans with healing skills, but she had never encountered one personally. Most of the encounters her people had had with humans involved conflict, not compassion. But there was something in his tone, in his eyes, that made her question everything she had been taught. "Why?" she asked, her voice still hoarse. "Why? Help me!" After everything, Caleb paused, his eyes softening even more. "Because it's the right thing to do." Zira blinked at him, confused. "Right thing? You know nothing of my people, nothing of what we've done. I don't need to know your people's history to know that you're hurt," Caleb replied simply. "All I know is that I can help you, and I will." Zira was silent. His words didn't make sense to her. Why would a human offer kindness without asking for anything in return? In her experience, everything had a price. But Caleb seemed different. He didn't seem interested in revenge or power. He wasn't asking for anything from her. He was simply helping. "Why don't you rest now?" Caleb suggested, his voice calm and patient. "You've been through enough." Zira couldn't speak. She couldn't bring herself to ask more. She simply closed her eyes, her mind racing. Was this a trap? Or had she found something new? Something she hadn't expected? She was lost in her thoughts when Caleb's voice interrupted her again.
"I'm going to let you rest. I'll be right outside if you need anything."
She felt his presence leave the room, but her thoughts were still with him. Compassion. Humanity? Were these really traits of the humans? Zira didn't know, but she knew one thing for certain. Her world had just been shaken, and she had no idea what the next step would be. As the door clicked shut behind him, she finally allowed herself to relax, just for a moment. The pain in her body was still sharp, but it was a new kind of pain, the kind that came from vulnerability, not from battle. And she realized something else, too. She didn't know what would happen next. But whatever it was, she wasn't alone anymore. Zira had never felt this helpless before. Her body was still sore from the brutal battle, and though her wounds were slowly healing, it seemed the more she rested, the more she became aware of just how broken she had been. The weight of her past decisions, of the war she had fought in, felt heavier with each passing hour. But as the days went on, a strange sense of confusion settled in. The man, Caleb Blackwell, continued to show her kindness, a quality she had never expected from a human. She had heard tales of humans, warriors, ruthless, driven by power, and willing to conquer anything in their path. But Caleb was nothing like the stories. Zira had spent years preparing herself to fight for survival, to outlast enemies, to be strong no matter the cost. She had been raised with the understanding that kindness was weakness. She had been taught that empathy had no place in battle, that vulnerability was a death sentence. Yet here she was, lying in the midst of human-made sterile sheets, with a strange human doctor caring for her, showing her a compassion she had never thought possible. She shifted uncomfortably in the bed, her eyes scanning the room. It was small but tidy, with simple medical tools and soft lighting that made everything feel warmer than she had expected. The door creaked open, and Caleb entered, carrying a tray of food. "I brought you some soup," he said, offering her a small bowl. "I thought you might be hungry." Zira eyed the food warily. She had never seen food like this before. It smelled warm and rich, something she had only ever tasted in her distant memories of peaceful times before the war. Her people were always at war, always fighting for survival. There had never been time to enjoy a simple meal, to share food with someone who wasn't a fellow soldier. Her stomach growled at the smell of the soup, and for a moment, she hesitated. Could she trust him? Could she allow herself to be so vulnerable? To accept something from him? A human? Caleb noticed her hesitation and placed the bowl closer to her. It's all right. You don't have to eat it if you don't want to, but I thought you might feel better if you did. Zira took the bowl from him, her fingers brushing against his for a brief second. The touch was unexpected, but it wasn't hostile. She stared at the soup, still unsure, but the hunger inside her was louder than the caution in her mind. Slowly, she brought the bowl to her lips and took a sip. To her surprise, it was delicious. The warm broth filled her mouth, and she could taste the rich flavors of herbs and meat. It wasn't a complex meal, but it was soothing, something she hadn't realized she longed for. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the sensation. You can have as much as you like, Caleb said softly, noticing the way she savored the first sip. I made enough for you to have more later if you're still hungry. Zira nodded, still too shocked by the simple act of kindness to speak. The soup warmed her from the inside, and with each bite she felt herself relax, just a little. As she ate, Caleb sat quietly by the window, reading a book. His presence was calm, non-threatening. It was like nothing she had ever experienced with the other soldiers she had known, who were always filled with urgency or anger. Why are you doing this? She finally asked, the question that had been lingering in her mind since the moment he had taken her in. Caleb looked up, his gaze soft and thoughtful. Doing what? Helping me? She said, her voice low.
You don't even know me. You've never seen someone like me before.
I'm not even from your planet. I could be dangerous, yet you... I'm a doctor, Caleb interrupted gently. It's my job to help people, no matter who they are, and I'm not interested in hurting you. You were hurt, and you needed help. That's all there is to it. Vera couldn't believe it. How could someone like him have such a simple outlook on life? In her world, everyone always had an agenda, a plan. There was always a cost to everything. Trust, safety, even a moment of peace. None of it came without a price. She had learned that the hard way. But Caleb seemed different. There was no hidden motive behind his actions, no price to pay. He simply helped because he could. She had been taught her entire life to never show weakness, to always keep her guard up. But here, in this small room, with this human doctor, she felt different, safe, even, and that terrified her. Zira took another sip of the soup, her mind racing. She had never known peace like this before. Her thoughts were interrupted by Caleb's voice once again. I know this is difficult, he said, his tone reassuring. But you're going to get better. Your body's healing, and you need time to rest. Just give it time. We'll figure out everything else later. Zira didn't know what to say. She was so used to fighting for every breath, every moment of survival, that she didn't know how to simply exist in peace. But with each passing hour, each moment spent in Caleb's care, she began to wonder if it was possible to live a different life. A life where kindness wasn't seen as a weakness, but as strength. She finished the soup, and Caleb helped her sit up a little more comfortably in the bed. He then left her alone for a while, allowing her the space to process everything. Zira lay there in the quiet room, her thoughts a swirl of confusion. How could she trust a human? How could she trust anyone after everything her people had been through? Yet, with each passing day, Caleb proved that he wasn't like the others. He wasn't like her enemies. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and Caleb poked his head in. I'm going to check your wounds again, just to make sure everything's healing properly, he said. It won't hurt. I promise. Zira nodded silently, unable to speak. Her body felt heavy, her thoughts too scattered to form words. Caleb moved to her side, gently unwrapping the bandages around her side and chest. Zira winced slightly as he touched the tender skin, but it wasn't unbearable. His touch was gentle, almost respectful. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low as he worked. "I'm fine," Zira muttered, even though she wasn't entirely sure of that herself. He paused for a moment, his gaze lingering on her face. "You're stronger than you realize." Zira wasn't sure what to make of his words. She had always been strong, or at least she had thought so, but perhaps Caleb saw something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. Perhaps, for the first time in her life, she wasn't just a warrior. Maybe she was something else too, a person deserving of compassion. The thought left her unsettled, but there was also a strange comfort in it. As Caleb finished checking her wounds and redressed them, he smiled gently. "You should rest again. I'll be right outside if you need anything." Zira closed her eyes, still unable to find the answers she was looking for. Her body was healing, but her heart was not so easily fixed. She had seen so much death, so much destruction, that she wasn't sure she could let herself believe in something as fragile as trust. Yet, as Caleb stepped out of the room, leaving the door ajar behind him, Zira allowed herself a moment of peace. She wasn't alone anymore. And that, in itself, was a strange, unfamiliar comfort. The days that followed were filled with a quiet rhythm. Zira's body continued to heal under Caleb's care. Her wounds, once deep and menacing, were now closing up, and her strength slowly began to return. But with each passing day, Zira felt herself becoming more and more uncertain. The comfort Caleb provided, the simple kindness that he showed, seemed to fill the empty spaces within her. It was a new sensation, one that she was not accustomed to, and she found herself both drawn to it and afraid of it. There was an unfamiliar vulnerability that came with his presence. She had always relied on her strength, her ability to fight, and her unyielding resolve. But now, in the quiet of this human-made room, she was forced to face the softness she had been taught to reject. Zira sat by the small window, looking out at the sky. The vastness of space stretched out before her, a reminder of her place in the universe. Her people, the Edrax, were warriors, always fighting, always on the move. There was no time for peace, no time for tenderness. She had learned to survive through strength, through violence, and through the cold, harsh ways of war. But now, in this strange place, she felt something unfamiliar tugging at her, something gentle, something human. Zira? Her name, spoken gently, brought her back from her thoughts. Caleb stood at the doorway, his expression warm but cautious. "I was just checking in," he said, his tone soft. "How are you feeling today?" Zira met his gaze, her heart stirring with something she couldn't fully understand. She quickly turned her eyes away, not wanting to show any weakness. "I'm fine," she replied shortly, standing up from the window. "Your care is acceptable." Caleb's smile was gentle. He knew she wasn't being entirely honest, but he didn't press. He had learned in the past few days that Zira was not one to share easily. Still, her improvement was evident even if she refused to admit it. "I was hoping we could talk," Caleb said, stepping into the room. "I know you've been through a lot, and it might be helpful to talk about it." Zira stiffened. Talking about her past, about her people, about the war, it was not something she wanted to do. She had lived through it, and now, in this quiet space, she wanted nothing more than to forget it. But Caleb's presence was persistent, like a gentle force she couldn't avoid. "I'm not interested in sharing," she said, her voice firm. "I came here to heal, not to talk." Caleb nodded, respecting her boundary. He had learned not to push too hard. "Of course," he said. "I just wanted to offer you the option. If you ever change your mind, I'm here." Zira said nothing, but the words lingered in her mind long after he left the room. She didn't know what to make of his offer. In her life, vulnerability had been a luxury she couldn't afford. Talking about her past, about the things she had done, would only make her weak in her eyes. And weakness was dangerous. The following days became a routine. Caleb continued to care for her, treating her wounds and offering her food. His kindness never wavered, and slowly, Zira found herself looking forward to his visits. It wasn't just the care he provided. It was the way he treated her like a person, not an alien, not a warrior. He treated her like she mattered. But no matter how much her body healed, her mind remained a battlefield. She could feel her walls beginning to crack, but she fought them back with every ounce of strength she had. She couldn't allow herself to become soft. She couldn't let herself rely on Caleb, or anyone for that matter. Her people didn't show weakness, and neither could she. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb approached her with a different look in his eyes. He had always been patient, always gentle, but tonight there was something else, something more serious in his expression. "Zira," he began, his voice more serious than usual. "I know you don't want to talk about your past, but I need to ask you something. There are people looking for you." Zira's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced, memories of her people, their wars, their never-ending battles, flooding her thoughts. Had they found her already? Was it over? "I've been in contact with a few of your people," Caleb continued, his tone gentle but insistent. "They've been trying to get in touch with you. I don't know what it means, but they seem to think you've gone missing." Zira's pulse quickened. She felt her body tense, the familiar coldness of fear crawling up her spine. Her thoughts raced. What if they came for her? What if they found her here, with a human, someone who had shown her nothing but kindness? "I have to go," Zira said, her voice sharp. "If they've found me, I can't stay here. I can't let them come for you." Caleb looked at her, his eyes full of concern. "You don't have to go alone," he said quietly. "I'll help you, Zira. I know you're afraid, but I want to help." "I don't want you to face this alone." His words were like a balm to the raw wound that had been festering inside her for so long, but she quickly pushed the feeling down, replacing it with the cold logic she had been trained to rely on. "No," she said firmly, "I must face this myself." Caleb didn't argue. He simply nodded, understanding that she needed to make this decision on her own. "Just know that you don't have to do it alone if you don't want to." Zira turned away, walking toward the window. The weight of his words pressed down on her. The idea of accepting help, of relying on someone else, especially a human, was still foreign to her. But deep inside, she felt a part of her wanting to reach out, wanting to trust Caleb. She could no longer deny the bond that had begun to form between them, but her pride, her fear, kept her from embracing it. Later that night, as the moon hung high in the sky, Zira lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her mind was a whirlpool of conflicting thoughts. The past, her people, Caleb, the uncertainty of everything. She had always known what to do in a battle: fight, survive, and protect her own. But now, here in this small human colony, she felt lost. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling in a storm. She could feel the pull of her past, of her duty to her people. But she could also feel the pull of something else, the pull of the kindness Caleb had shown her, the tenderness she had never known before. She wasn't sure what the future held. She didn't know what she would do when the time came to face her people, but for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she wasn't alone, where she wasn't constantly fighting, and maybe, just maybe, that future didn't have to be a lonely one. The next few days were filled with a tense quiet. Caleb continued his gentle care, tending to Zira's injuries, making sure she was comfortable. But neither of them spoke much of what lay ahead. Zira could feel the weight of the looming threat, her people growing ever closer. But the fears she had been running from for so long seemed to settle into the corners of her mind. The wound in her chest was healed, but the wound inside, the one that came from years of war, still throbbed. She had tried to push it away, to focus on the comfort Caleb offered, but every time the thought of her people crossed her mind, the past wouldn't stay buried. Zira had been raised to be a warrior. The concept of peace was foreign, and so was the idea of trusting others outside of her own kind. Yet Caleb's care had cracked something open in her that she couldn't ignore, a vulnerability that terrified her. Now, the moment had arrived. The search for her was no longer something in the distant future. Zira had been hiding long enough, but she knew that she couldn't stay hidden forever. She had to face her past. That night, after the sun had dipped below the horizon, Zira made up her mind. She couldn't stay in this small room, sheltered away from the world. Her people were coming for her, and she had no choice but to face them. She would leave. She would leave before they found her, before they threatened the fragile peace she had found. As she packed a small bag, taking only the essentials, Zira felt a deep sadness settle over her. It wasn't just about the people who were searching for her, or the fact that she was leaving Caleb behind. It was the realization that she had come to care for this human doctor in a way she never expected. His compassion had disarmed her, and it was something she had never allowed herself to experience before. She was about to leave when she heard the soft sound of the door creaking open. Caleb entered the room, looking concerned, his brow furrowed. "Zira, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with worry. Zira froze for a moment, her hand hovering over the bag she had packed. "I'm leaving," she said simply, avoiding his gaze. Caleb stepped closer, his eyes filled with both confusion and understanding. "Leaving? Zira, why?" "Because my people are coming for me," Zira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't stay here any longer." "I've put you at risk." "No," Caleb said, his tone firm but soft. "You don't have to go alone. We can figure this out together." Zira shook her head. "You don't understand. They will come, whether I want them to or not." "They won't stop until they find me." Caleb's face softened with a mixture of concern and compassion.
I know you're scared, but you don't have to face this alone. I'm here, Zira. You don't have to leave.
"Please, let me help you." The words hit Zira harder than she expected. She had spent her whole life fighting alone, always expecting the worst from everyone. But Caleb, he was different. His kindness had shown her a side of herself she had never known, and she realized in that moment that she didn't want to leave him. Not yet. Not when she had just begun to understand the possibility of trust. "I can't put you in danger," Zira said, her voice breaking slightly.
You don't know what they're capable of. Caleb stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her arm.
"I don't care what they're capable of. You matter to me, Zira. You don't have to do this alone." For a moment, Zira's heart swelled. She had always believed that being strong meant being alone, that showing any kind of weakness meant defeat. But Caleb's words, his unwavering belief in her, made her wonder if there was another way. Could she face her past, her people, with him by her side? "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Caleb's hand squeezed her arm reassuringly. "We'll figure it out together." The words settled in Zira's heart. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. Caleb had shown her what it meant to trust, to be seen not as an alien or a warrior, but as a person who deserved compassion. And now, she realized, maybe she didn't have to hide from her past. Maybe, just maybe, she could face it, alongside someone who truly cared for her. With a deep breath, Zira made her decision. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll stay, but we need a plan." Caleb smiled, his relief evident in his eyes. I'll help you however I can. Together they sat down at the small table, Caleb quickly sketching out a plan to deal with her people. They would need to hide, at least for a while, until they could figure out a way to ensure her safety. Caleb had contacts, people he trusted, who could help them. He was determined to make sure Zira didn't face this alone. They could escape if necessary, or they could confront her people together, but they would do it on their terms, not on hers alone. As the hours passed, Zira felt herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time she wasn't afraid to face it. She had Caleb's support, and that meant more than she could put into words. His belief in her had shifted something inside her. She didn't have to be the cold, unfeeling warrior anymore. She didn't have to carry that weight alone. The plan they formed was simple but effective. Caleb had managed to contact a few allies in nearby colonies who owed him favors, people who could help Zira hide, or at the very least stall her pursuers. They would move quickly, and Zira would have a chance to decide what her future would look like. The war with her people didn't have to define her. By the time morning came, Zira felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She had faced countless battles before, but she had always done it alone. Now, with Caleb at her side, she realized she had more than just hope. She had a chance. As Caleb prepared to leave the room, Zira reached out and stopped him. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. Caleb looked back at her, his eyes kind and sincere. "You don't need to thank me, Zira. I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No," she said, her voice firm now. "You're not just anyone. You've given me something I never thought I'd have again. I won't forget it." With that, she watched him leave the room, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She didn't know what would happen next, or how her people would react when they finally found her. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face whatever came. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. As she lay down to rest, she let herself relax for the first time since the war had started. No more fighting, no more running. She had a new purpose now, a chance to create something different, something better. And whatever that future looked like, she knew she wouldn't be facing it alone.